Hello everyone, and welcome to this video where we are going to attempt to build the smallest modular engine ever. Now, possibly it's been done before, in fact probably it's been done before, but in this case we're going to document it on this video, and I'll show you how to build a tiny engine and how to make it run usefully. As you can see, when we hop on this motorized ATV, it's chugging along quite nicely for such a small vehicle. Under the hood, or seat rather, you have a tiny little engine with one single cylinder. So let's see how we can extract that and how I can show you what can be done to make such a small engine, because it is useful in this game to make small engines on occasion for all kinds of purposes. One thing to keep in mind when building small engined vehicles is the fact that usually the constraint is the vehicle body itself. Because of course, if we start building one right here, we have, a large area. But when you have a vehicle, then you have physical constraints. But we're going to put it out here. We're going to lay out the parts of this modular engine and explain it. Now, you may want to use the radiator. However, keep in mind the smallest radiators are 3x3, and not only that, you'll have to have your cooling manifold and a bunch of piping coming out of the engine, including a pump to push it through the system. So what I do when it's a tiny engine is you just bypass this system, you don't have a radiator, and you sort of use the RPS and the engine temperature to prevent it from overheating. Now, for small creations such as the quad, small tractors, forklifts, sort of anything like this, golf carts, you're not going to drive across the whole map in it, or at least you shouldn't. Plus, it has usually a small gas tank, so it should be okay to not have the radiator. Of course, if you're having cooling issues, you're going to need a radiator, but for the purposes of this tutorial, we are not going to put that in. So we're going to start with the parts of a modular engine. So you're going to need a cylinder, you're going to need a crankshaft, and you're going to need at least a single thing on the front, an accessory drive or belt drive with possibly a starter. Now you can use a electric motor and prevent using a starter. In that case, you'd kind of jump start it. You'd use the motor to fire it up. But if we do this, then you will have an engine that can actually fire up. So that is a very basic engine. And then of course the rest of the modular bits, you'll need a clutch. And there you have it. Of course, in order for the engine to work, you're going to need some manifolds. So we'll need an air manifold, exhaust manifold, and fuel manifold. But in order to do that, you're going to need a T-piece, because as you can see, well, technically we have 3 exposed pieces on this cylinder, so we might be able to get away by just putting it purely on this. So let's try air. Let's try on this side, we can put the fuel, and the exhaust can be straight out the back if we want, just like this. So fuel can go down there. Now, you can mix and match the piping, and I'll explain that in a second, but pretty much that can be our air, that is our exhaust, and this is our tank. Now, remember what I said in the other videos about needing to have not only somewhere to charge or refill your fuel, but you'll also have to have that vent. So it is a little annoying. Again, not mods. Developers, if you're watching this, I would love a clickable button here to allow the tank to have a self-gas relief valve or bleeding valve. But in this case, we have to kind of do this. And then here you'd have your hose end. Again, developers, if you're watching this, and I know this has been said, I would love a hose end attachment that looks like this rather than this, but it is what it is for now. So that is at the basic level an engine. If you have space on the front like we do now, I do recommend putting an alternator, because that way you can actually charge up your batteries just from using that engine power. And of course, you'll need a battery as well. So I'd probably shove that in somewhere as well. So that would be a pretty compact engine design. Remember how I said you can mix and match piping? Well, this would be an example. So you can use that T-piece and actually have it go right through that RPS. And because they're two different types of matter, pretty much, then in this case, this would not cause any issues. But for example, if you try to mix fuel with exhaust, you're going to have a problem because they're both types of matters. Whereas RPS and liquid, or RPS and gas, they're two separate things and you can have them pass through like this. I don't know if we really helped anything by doing this because it still kind of sticks out. So again, I would really, really love a gas tank or fuel tank, fluid tank that has an automatic gas relief valve, and then keep the gas relief valve for use for custom tanks. But all the pre-mades, in my opinion, really should just use that. Anyway, this type of setup now is ready to go, and you could have a, attach it to something. And actually, you're in luck because we're going to make our golf cart a diesel-powered golf cart. So I can start by stripping off all this stuff, which we don't need to use for this. And we're going to pretty much see what we're left with once we open up the rear here. So this is all workable space that we have for our engine. Now it's not a lot, it's not that big, but let's see if we can't shove this engine somewhere into this golf cart. Now I do want to grab some information from the quad here, and you could see how we've connected the piping to the axles so the wheels get powered, but also that is what we pass through our fuel manifold. So we've combined the paths. Again, RPS and fuel can be mixed as long as it doesn't go through a clutch or something. Fuel cannot go through a clutch or through other things, but in this case it goes into here and through that gear transfer point, but also it goes up into this and through this path to there. So with that kind of mentality, we can actually apply this to the golf cart. Now the golf cart is a bit of a different configuration because we only have one singular kind of level under the seats. I don't really want to place things in other positions, but in true golf cart fashion, what I will do is the battery can probably be right under the seat here, as they are in most times in real life, but we'll see if that's something that we do. Anyway, that does give us a couple of options for placing the engine. Just quickly looking around the golf cart, you could see here is where we had the original charging port for the batteries. Now that actually opens up this side for some modifications. Now we don't technically need any of that stuff there. So what I'm almost thinking is we can put the belt drive right here, and next to it we can place the starter just like this. Now this one kind of goes unused right now, but what's interesting is on this direction now we can put the shaft and we can put a single cylinder. So this way we have kind of created ourselves a bit of space for all this, and here we can put the clutch. Okay, so that engine kind of lays in that direction. It works, but we'll have to see how we can organize or sort out any of these pipes in here. Now this is where it gets tricky because you have a bunch of different parts that you have to use, including the pipes, including RPS, and you need a gear in here as well so the thing can go in reverse. It's a little bit of trial and error, so I'm not going to showcase that part on the video, but what I'm almost thinking right now is if we have this back piece, which is just a regular cube, be where we refill the fuel, so there'd be a fluid port or hose just like that. Then we can have kind of the gas tank in this region with the gas relief valve, and it can be attached to the gas line, which can also go through the RPS. So that's usually how I approach this type of situation, but there's no right or wrong, it just comes down to trial and error. So we got the fuel tank here connected to this hose port, which goes into the fuel intake, which is also part of the RPS kind of path. The air tank is down here. I ended up deleting this and adding an alternator, so now while that doesn't look so great, it's going to be much more functional. And now it's just a matter of getting that RPS path with a gear, which is, in my opinion, going to be the hardest bit here, because if we want to make it all-wheel drive, we're going to have to connect it to this front axle. So maybe it's just going to have to be rear-wheel drive, and we'll see if that's going to work or affect the engine performance. If I were to say let's just do rear-wheel drive, it would be quite simple. I just take this here, put a gearbox here, and connect that to the RPS path, which goes there. Now the only thing missing now is that silly little gas relief valve. So right now this engine would eventually stall out because it does not have a gas relief valve. So what we can do with that, probably actually, we could put the air manifold down here. As such, we could probably put our air filter right here, and I'm almost thinking it would just stick right out of this part here and go into this area where we have a pipe, a T-piece corner, just like this. Oops. Have to make sure it's in the right orientation, like that. And then that gas relief valve along with the port. So now that should cover all the basics. We have some extra space up here, but overall the gear shift and that path and this is all kind of connected. Originally I was going to place the battery here because I saw it open, but we'll keep the battery under the seat as we said, which will actually open up this portion for yet another tank. So we're going to actually increase the range by just adding another pipe corner piece here like that, and adding a second gas tank. So 2 gas tanks are now there, which is nice. So we get a little bit of extra range. The gear shift is there. Now we have all this space here, which is actually perfect for that microcontroller that we've developed for the rat. Now I will show you how to build a very quick microcontroller for this setup, but I'm going to end up using that because I want the same type of configuration. As you can see, the microcontroller can fit there perfectly, and then the only downside is that front axle is entirely unpowered. Again, not sure how that's going to affect the wheels and what's going to happen. Ideally, we'd have it all-wheel drive, but let's just see if this does work, as I showed you like that. Another nice thing about this is we can actually end up putting the catalytic converter in right here, and as long as it's orientated the proper way, like that, exhaust out can come here, and that gives us, or should at least reduce the amount of fumes coming out of there. Now back here we have an open slot, so what I'm going to do is add the other cable plug in here, so you could do all the business you need to do is here, whether you fill it up or charge it up. Right here we could just put a regular block, there's no need for anything else, and visually this thing seems to be okay. Again, only thing kind of the question mark is whether we need to power it with something more than just this singular axle. Of course, I have the option of not having this and instead routing this around here through there, and then we could either put a smaller microcontroller or if I want to reconfigure the roof and put that microcontroller there, or worst case scenario, see, it doesn't really fit there. I don't want to increase the size like that, but that is also an option with some styling changes. I'm just trying to keep it as small as possible. So in this case, I still think the single axle option would be the preferred one, assuming it works. So inside the microcontroller, everything is run by a PID controller, the advanced version, and I do have a lot of other stuff here, including the brakes and including the steering and all that other stuff that I developed when I was making that other quad. But the very simple nature of this microcontroller is as such. So you have the RPS coming out of, or that you set. So we set the RPS here, and you attach it to your throttle line. So whatever you're throttling, you multiply it with your set RPS value, and then you clamp it 10 minimum and 100 maximum. Now this gets placed into the set point of the PID, whereas your actual RPS is what you put in as the process variable. So that leaves the set RPS that you set on your microcontroller multiplied by the throttle going into the clamp and into the set point. The process variable of the RPS is what you attach, and you put a constant number of 0.1 as your proportional gain. Now the RPS you'll also put here in a less than function if it's less than 2.5, and if our engine is on, so that's this instrument panel, but this could very simply be a key. So if a key is on and your RPS is less than 2.5, turn on the starter. So that's where this goes here. And also our on button turns on the PID controller. Now whatever comes out of the PID goes through the clamp between 0 and 1, and that goes into the air, and pretty much half of that goes to the fuel. So that is a very simple and basic overview of this microcontroller. I actually was inspired from Pingu and Alistair's microcontroller for their quad, and that's how I developed this. I used some elements of theirs, so I'm not claiming this to be my own research and development. I used their design or clever design for the bare bones of this microcontroller and kind of redid it into my own version. With the microcontroller out of the way, we can attach everything to the batteries, and we can attach the microcontroller as well. So we have over here the kind of main microcontroller, and that is the instrument panel, and then we have the seat microcontroller, which I believe is right here, going to the seat data right there. So those are the composite channels, and then the rest is this. So brakes, go to the brakes, the right wheel, the left wheel, and all that other good stuff. Reverse will be the gear, which I didn't actually set to -1, so now it is. Fuel is the fuel line, which is right there. And then air is the air line. Gas is what we have in our gas tanks. Now, because I have 2 of them, this won't really be accurate. Starter motor we have here, and RPS we have right here. So that is basically what we've plugged in to this microcontroller. That came straight off the quad, mind you. The one thing that I did not touch is the clutch. So right now this clutch is set to nothing, as well as the alternator clutch is set to nothing. So the RPS I can attach to that alternator clutch, but this I can't attach to this, otherwise we're going to end up probably stalling the thing. Now what I did for the quad here was actually have the clutch attached to a maximum minimum clamp setup, and that clamp setup was set and defined to prevent the engine from stalling. Now that is some trial and error type thing. You'll end up having to test it out, but what you see here is this goes to there, and it's just clamped between 0 and 0.4 and going to our throttle. So the throttle defines what this is, but it stops at 0.4. Now that is trial and error. That number worked for the quad, it worked for Pingu and Alistair's quad, but we'll see if it works for the golf cart. We have some little bit of space here actually, so we could put that clamp in right here, and I'll put 0.4 and attach this to the clutch pressure and this number to the WS. So in that case now it is 1-to-1 just like the quad there. So if I fire it up, you could hear the engine kind of started. Now it seems to be stalling out a little bit, but we are getting some forward action. If I brake, it comes to a stop. So that seemed to make the small engine actually work. It just now comes to testing it and trial and error fixing it up. I added a tooltip, and when I start it up, it actually does build up a nice bit of RPS with 100% throttle. The only downside is it is very slow because it's rear-wheel drive. I did have to set the clamp, as you can see down here, to 0.35, but now we can play around with changing the gearing. I have no idea how this will work, but it's worth a shot because in theory we may be able to properly gear it such that it gets a bit more top speed. And we did it. So the quad is intended for, you know, towing things, moving things. It is more of a workhorse. You could see that if we try to tow the quad with the golf cart, it's not very successful. That said, if we disconnect that rope and try to just drive the golf cart as such, we're going to be able to get a bit of top speed. Good enough at least that it can transport us across the base or across oil rigs or whatever. So you can see this is kind of what a golf cart is intended for. It's not intended to win any races, it's not intended to be a workhorse and carry large loads, but it could certainly pick up some speed and move you around. So that's sort of what I wanted for this thing. That's the whole point of a golf cart creation versus the quad creation, and I'm pretty happy with this. It is a little unstable. My steering preference is to be sort of, like I said, on that Grand Theft Auto style where you could kind of evade the police. It's not intended just purely for drifting, but I do like a bit more maneuverability. So if you're kind of trying to drive around certain things like this, you can do that. So anyways, I'm quite content with how this creation turned out now. It has 2 gas tanks, so it has a bit better range than the quad. It can be used kind of as a person's transport, and it honestly looks pretty cool. So it's a tiny little engine jammed up in there, and I'm happy with how it works. So thank you all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you'll stay tuned for other videos as well as the creations I have coming out. And until next time, happy Stormworksing, everyone.